Namo Namo tassa bhagavato arahatu samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahatu samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahatu samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So the last, years now, while I'm putting together my book, my next book, the main challenges is how to translate some of these Pali terms into English. I'm still struggling with it. We think English is a pretty flexible language, but it's not. When it comes to translating certain terms, it's very difficult. Maybe English is very good at explaining the material world, but not so good at explaining the psychological world. But in our Theravada tradition, we're quite fortunate in a way to have the Pali language as our kind of base language. In some ways, it's kind of awkward. You got to remember how to translate some of these Pali terms, and sometimes people forget to translate. They talk to beginners and they just rattle off some Pali terms and just jargon words. And then you ask them, what do you mean? Well, that's a good question. What do I mean? Do you want to put it in English? But having a kind of a base language like Pali is quite helpful, because it's sort of like we can go back to this language, which supposedly came from the time of the Buddha. I think historically speaking, it comes soon after the time of the Buddha, but a lot closer than English anyway. The Buddha didn't speak English. Yeah. As much as it may surprise you, English wasn't even invented at the time of the Buddha. The people in England spoke Celtic or something. But at the same time, what happens is that if it gets translated into one language, there's maybe it's off just a little bit. Then it goes from that language to the next language and off a bit more. I remember I thought that Thai language was quite close to the Pali, you see, because based on the Thai is based upon Buddhism and Theravada Buddhism. Yeah. But, and sometimes it's easier to speak in Thai, explaining certain Buddhist concepts. Doesn't help to Australians, but but then also Thai language is also sort of corrupted Pali language somewhat. Like one of the monks who stayed with me in New Zealand, he was trying to be a Pali scholar, and he was saying that he prefers to speak English than Thai when it comes to Pali translations. I said, really? I was really surprised. And he said, well, like one example he gave was the word vinyan. Vinyan, how to translate it? Usually translated as consciousness in English. It's not quite right. I just wrote about it today, actually, this afternoon. It's not quite right, but anyway, close enough, I guess, for most people who are not Pali scholars. But in the Thai language, when you say vinyan, people usually refer to ghost. Yeah, the ghost. Because in the Abhidhamma anyway, it's vinyan, which carries over to the next life, you see. So the Thais, when they refer to vinyan, it usually brings up ghosts, images of ghosts. Yeah, right? Two meanings, yeah. But there is the common meaning, usually means first a ghost, but then there's the, if you say, I'm speaking Pali, no ghost, no. But then this monk friend said, well, but in English, there's no reference to ghost. Vinyan is consciousness, plain and simple. Yeah? It's just the knowing right now. You're conscious right now, you see. So he's saying that's why he preferred English translations, but I mean, I can't translate very well from Pali to Thai, so I have no choice but to use English. But sometimes, when I was in Switzerland, had to sometimes refer to German and French. Sometimes they had better translations of Pali terms than English. Yeah. But it doesn't help us here either, does it? No. But we had one of our projects at the monastery was to translate some of the talks, Dhamma talks, to German or French, and it was a real headache. Well, it wasn't so much for me because everybody else did it, not me. Other people did it. But they came to me with these questions. Should I use this word and should I use that word? And so I have no, There are different ways you can do it. You can do it literally or you can do it meaningfully. And personally, I prefer the meaningful one, what people can understand rather than the technical correct response, for example, correct translation, scholastic translation. Sometimes didn't make any sense to the average person. But when I also reached the limitations of English language to translate some of these Pali concepts. So that's why it's usually suggested if you're really serious about Theravada Buddhism, to learn a bit of Pali anyway, learn some of the Pali language, at least some of the basic terms, because they don't fit exactly into English terms. Like vijnana. But it is a refined point. I mean, it takes a bit of refinement to get down to that level of knowing, that level of understanding. And then, I mean, part of it is just to have, as it were, a signpost, because still the direct experience is not the same as the word, is it? Yeah, but at least it points you in the right direction. If you don't even have the right guidance verbally or conceptually, we can really go off. Like when some other religions come to a foreign country, they have to use the local language. When Buddhism went to China, for example, they didn't have, the Chinese language didn't have these concepts either from Pali. So they had to kind of make up words. They borrowed some from Taoism, borrowed some words from Taoism because it was a native Chinese language, religion, had a language already. They say it took 300 years for Buddhism to develop its own language in China. 300 years. So how long has it been in Australia? We'll have our own Australian Buddhist dialect. But one of the other points is that when you study the Pali language, for example, and try and translate it, you realize just how fixed we are. You could say we're culturally imprisoned. We have our own particular language and concepts, and how we're just defined by that. Language defines our way of thinking. And if you think of vijnana as a ghost, then you miss the point. Yeah. You get frightened when you talk about vijnana or something. But it's just like going to a foreign country in a way. I mean, we have our fixed concepts, we have our fixed ideas about what we're going to see, and you go there and it's totally different. I mean, part of it is you can't think outside what your perception is, what sanya, your perception is. That's all you've learned. Your perception is how you see the world. That's what you learned. That's your reference point. So when somebody says, certain thing, you got to refer it back to this memory you have. And your memories are based upon where you live, and the education you had, and your friends or whatever who influenced you. And then if you go to these places, like traveling, for example, you go to a different place, you suddenly see something quite different. When I moved to New Zealand, all these, moved to Australia, all these weird plants here. Are they weird plants to you? They're weird to me. Most of them don't look anything like the trees in Vancouver. Except they have a few imported pine trees here. But they have no eucalyptus trees in Vancouver. It's too cold and wet for them. Not to mention the animals. I'm used to seeing bears jump out on the road, not kangaroos. So sometimes I have to kind of stop and think, which planet am I on today? Oh yes, right, Australia, right, okay. Then going to any other, different place. Even being in Thailand was different plants and vegetation. You had to get used to it. Flora and fauna, different flora and fauna. Had to get used to it. In Vancouver, there's almost no snakes. In Canada, there's a few, the rattlesnakes and a few garden snakes, but in Thailand, you have to be quite snake conscious when you walk around. Same in Australia, right? Be snake conscious. Yeah, I won't. Yeah, you must know already, but but in Thailand, it's because of the very warm climates and very fertile land. There's a lot of snakes there. It's not like Australia where it's so dry you hardly see them. Some of the most poisonous ones are in Australia, but haven't seen them. The landscape is so, well, most of the time it's not too fertile, very dry, But once you learn how to live with them, when people first meet something strange, of course they're frightened. They're just confused and frightened, don't know what to do, and until you got a label for it, you got some frame of reference for it. So, especially in the Pali language, there's quite a lot of reference to, you can say, the inner world, states of mind, for example, and how the mind works. That's what the Buddha was interested in meditation practice and liberation. So, it's not a matter of just always referring to the physical world, but most of our defilements, our confusion, our limitations are in the mind. So we had quite a very varied vocabulary about states of mind, but it's hard to reference that in English many times. Yeah. But the point is that once we recognize there are some of these different states of mind which we haven't been aware of before, we haven't even had them mentioned to us, we can look for them. Yeah, Buddha points out greed, aversion, delusion. You probably have some experience of it, but have you ever actually made them conscious? Try to investigate? I mean, I think most people are a bit frightened of them, aren't they? Don't look at your greed, you might get greedy for it. Don't look at your aversion, you might get frightened by it or averse to it. But Buddha very blatantly says those are the first states of mind to observe. Greed, aversion, delusion. Of course, he does give us, fortunately, some very helpful tools to use, because he also realizes it's not so easy. Most people just gloss over them. Or they have already fixed ideas about them. Greed is okay as long as it's within the legal limits. Aversion, well, it's not so socially acceptable. Delusion, what's that? I don't know. You think if you recognize delusion, you have to go to university and find out about it. But the Buddha points them out. He just labels them. And then really it's up to us to investigate them. And when you turn to investigate them, these are just like little signposts, like pointing away. That's the way to, to Wiseman's Ferry. So there's a little, 2 words, Wiseman's Ferry. Yeah. But when you get there, it's a big experience, isn't it? There's a lot to that little label, isn't there? What is Wiseman's Ferry? Some people just see the pub, probably, the average person, not us, of course, but we see the ferry and the post office, right? Post office, and what else we'd see there? Huh? The coffee shop, okay, yeah. I don't see the coffee shop, but but some people, that when they hear of Wiseman's Ferry, they see only one side of it, don't they? One part of it. And if we say something like, what are the defilements of your mind? Well, what defilements? I don't have any defilements. Nothing's very obvious to me. Just ask your friend. They probably know more about your defilements than you do. But the Buddha labels them, points them out. There's this 5 hindrances, the 10 fetters, and if you kind of emphasize them too much, it can seem quite depressing. But there's also the factors of enlightenment, and there's the 5 powers, spiritual powers. There's the 4 divine abidings. So there is other side of it too, positive and negative. But I mean, just for example, like the factors of awakening, factors of enlightenment. How many of us would even recognize them? Huh? We all have some degree of concentration, some degree of mindfulness, but awareness. But do you actually recognize it as a factor of awakening, enlightenment? Something like tranquility. Tranquility is a factor of enlightenment. For most of us, tranquility is a factor of laziness, isn't it? Who wants to be tranquil? You got to go out there and have some fun, get some excitement, do something with your life. And tranquility, factor of awakening, enlightenment. I don't get it. Equanimity. Maybe energy you can recognize, energy, factor of enlightenment. Investigation of Dhamma. That's one that's not really mentioned very often in the other categories. Investigation of Dhamma. With contemplation, investigation. Look at it. Look at what you see. You're mindful. You develop mindfulness with regard to the greed, aversion, delusion, for example. Then investigate. What is this greed really? What is this aversion really? And not just theorizing about it. looking in the dictionary, finding out the different kinds of aversion, of anger or aversion, but looking at it, seeing it in your own experience. What's your brand of aversion? And sometimes these are so close to us, it's like, we can't see them because it's so close to us. It's like trying to look at your nose. Then the Buddha says, you got a nose. So you got aversion. Really? I just don't, I can't see it. Look closer. Look in the mirror. No. Then you can see your nose. Just observe your speech, for example. And then you can notice aversion arising. And notice the pattern of your thoughts. And notice even some of your memories coming up. You can notice with certain consistency, you might notice, oh yes, there is a little bit of a aversion tendency there. Yes. Yeah. Just a little one. But just trying to get a label for some of these terms. I mean, a little dosa. Dosa is aversion. Yeah, you can use, there's aversion. I mean, just getting a translation of one word like that, there's anger, aversion, hatred, irritation. The whole, when you dig into it, there's a lot of fuel there for investigation, isn't there? And maybe some people, they could acknowledge they haven't really got anger. They aren't really anger temperament, but they do get irritated. Just slightly irritated now and again. Some people, it's very obvious. They just kind of just erupt, fly into a rage. It's very obvious. So yeah. But other people, it manifests in slightly different forms. So when you have a range of different translations, okay, you go, not anger, and not aversion, but irritation. Oh, ooh, that triggered off something. One time when I was, sorry, it's safe. Let's see. One time when I was meditating, I think I told the story already, but I mean, I'll shorten it this time. The story on the ski track. That's an old one, yeah, I guess, but it's really good. And it is a cool night tonight, so I could talk about snow and ski tracks. But anyway, I thought, my first reaction was anger. But I thought that was it. Anger. Yeah, I know all about it. Yes, I've been meditating on anger. It's one of the states of mind the Buddha mentioned in the Discourse on Mindfulness. Anger. Yes. So I thought I knew all about it, but the feeling didn't go away. The kind of heat and tension in my heart didn't go away. So if it doesn't pass away, you haven't really seen it. You have to, when you see it clearly, it's released. So it hasn't really gone away. I just thought I knew about it. But then I looked a bit deeper. What is this? What is this manifestation then? That seems to be anger. I thought was anger. And it took a while to investigate it and practice metta, friendliness to it, and try to be more open and friendly and receptive to it, and give it a hug, and went through the whole routine. And then finally one day it manifested as resentment. It wasn't just anger, it was resentment. Resentment is a kind of aversion, right? But very subtle. It's very hard to observe resentment, isn't it? Doesn't show itself very easily, resentment. Somebody's a bit quiet, and a bit timidly thoughtful. and they're just bubbling away with resentment there. See the steam coming out of their ears or something. It'd be on a cold day. Then I thought that was the end of it, resentment, okay. I've seen that now, but still it wasn't gone yet. My heart still felt heavy and tight. And so looking at that again, trying to be open to it, trying to investigate it deeper, trying to experience it. What is it? And then one day it shifted. And it wasn't resentment, it was frustration. Yeah, frustration is a type of aversion too, isn't it? Frustration, you're not getting what you want, or your expectations aren't fulfilled. So it results in a type of aversion, frustration. That was a long story of my childhood. Frustration. I didn't get the candy when I wanted it. But I mean, even that was, even though seeing that, it was a lot more relaxed. My heart felt more open and spacious. It still wasn't gone yet. And then investigating that, and then came across fear. That's a really ultimate aversion, fear of losing myself. Yeah? That's existential fear, which I see as the kind of most basic emotion is fear. The fear of losing yourself. I mean, the self is not really there in the first place, but you create one because you're lonely. And you're so attached to it. It's your most precious friend, myself, and you're afraid of losing it. And of course, that can create a lot of frustration, resentment, anger, and aversion. Yeah. Imagine if you lose yourself. You'd really be totally shattered, wouldn't you? The ultimate aversion, ultimate anger. This isn't fair. The universe isn't fair. It's taken away myself, my precious self. Yeah. But when I saw the fear, then beyond that, peace. Then you can abide with, you can say, selflessness or fearlessness or whatever, aversionlessness, because all built upon this belief in the self. Yeah? So all of these so-called defilements all come from the self. But all we can see maybe in the beginning is just the spin-off in aversion, greed, aversion, delusion. That's how it spins the story. Anyway, we can know that. Right back to the grasping of self again. But it's so subtle, or so you're so deep within you, hard to see it. Well, we can start with greed, aversion, delusion. That's how it plays itself. It plays itself out, plays the story out. I want, I don't know. And if you can investigate them deep enough, thoroughly enough, you go right back to the source. Easier said than done. And very directly, the Buddha didn't talk much about the self. It's a very, very tricky topic, because you talk about it, then in a way you kind of affirm it. But he talked about how it expresses itself. Greed, aversion, delusion, the 5 hindrances, the fetters, whatever. So by dealing with those, which are sort of a bit more outside us, a bit more obvious, we can bring them back inside. Eventually you arrive at that truth directly then, rather than just theorize about it. Even you say, don't have greed, don't have aversion, don't have delusion. Yeah, be selfless. Yeah, I'm going to be selfless. Yeah, I'm going to be so wholly selfless. I'm going to be great. I'm going to be enlightened. I. Huh? So, whoops, you fall into the trap again. Can't see beyond yourself, you see. But you take those, take these conditions, how it's expressed, how self expresses itself, and you investigate them to their source, then it's like you creep up on yourself in the back door, and you surprise yourself, yeah? Rather than trying to face it head on, which you can't. So surprisingly, when one of the kind of tools the Buddha used, some of the other teachers were talking about, the self and the ultimate self and the higher self and all this kind of stuff. Buddha talked about the various expressions of self, the 5 groups of grasping, yeah, the way it expresses itself through the fetters or the hindrances. So where everybody else was talking about the self, this ultimate thing, the Atman, whatever, the Buddha just talked about kind of the technical aspects of that self. You've got in the 4 foundations of mindfulness: body, feeling, states of mind, and these particular phenomena. He didn't say there's a self there meditating. That's yourself. He said there's these expressions. You can say these processes going on in the body mind. Yeah, you look at them, you say, "Oh, I can recognize them. Yes. And if you can see them more clearly, just circuit that whole self-making process. It's not me meditating. There is mindfulness. There is a function of the mind, mindfulness, concentration, which is being developed. Of course, in the relative sense, we say, "Oh yes, I'm meditating. I'm developing concentration. It's my concentration." But if you develop concentration enough, what happens is yourself gets forgotten. The mind is concentrated, focused. Focus is a function of the mind. Focused attention. It doesn't need to be a reference to anybody doing it. It happens, and just as a function of mind. Mindfulness, full presence of mind. If your mind is fully present, there's no room for yourself in there. Yourself gets kind of blocked out. If you're still a thought of yourself and that your mind isn't fully present, still has a little bit of self trickling in, so it's not fully present yet. But just developing those factors, these factors of awakening, if you develop them, they become, factors in themselves. Beyond the control, beyond the influence, beyond the kind of corruption of self. You can redevelop the 7 factors of enlightenment. The 7 factors are there, but nobody is owning them. Nobody's home to own them. They just are functions of mind, and that's what is called enlightenment. When you leave yourself home. Leave yourself at home. But it's very hard to, talk about that in the ordinary English language, right? Even the words, enlightenment and awakening. What does that mean these days? Awakening, wake up in the morning, that's what awakening is. Enlightenment's coming out of your house on a sunny day. You get a bit of enlightenment. When I was in Switzerland, we're trying to translate some of these books into French also. And one of our translators, he was really, apparently the French have a lot of trouble with Buddhist language, Buddhist terms. Yeah. So but best they can do is revert to Christian terms. So enlightenment becomes illumination, which apparently is a Christian term. When the Christian mystics had a vision of God, They were illuminated. I remember the French nun saying, there's absolutely no word in French for samadhi, concentration. I don't know what it says about the French people, but no word for concentration. So sometimes we have to make up words that fit in. So I sometimes have to make up my own words too, but it doesn't go down so well with some people. We're kind of stuck on one hand with old translations. I mean, one of them, like mindfulness, that was actually a brilliant translation of sati. And it was thought up 150 years ago by one of the early translators, mindfulness. But some of the other ones, they're really off. Like one translator, they talked about they didn't know anything about deep concentration, about jhana. They said it was just sitting in trance. They called jhana was trance, you see. And it was they defined it as a way that since the monks had no work to do, didn't have to go to the office, had no work to do, so they just sat around in a cave somewhere under a tree in trance, just having a good time in trance. Obviously, she was not a meditator. Fortunately, a lot of her translations have been forgotten. But some of these early translators, they had no experience of Buddhism, no experience of meditation. So how would they know how to translate some of these words, samadhi and jhana, and to come up with the best what they're familiar with, being in trance. So if we have the wrong translation, it can kind of lead us astray, maybe. Yeah? Imagine how many people have read that book and then sat under a tree in trance, entranced. Daydreaming, in other words. Not investigating the factors of the factors of awakening, not being mindful of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. They're just sitting there with a blank mind. But fortunately, nowadays there are more people who are translating, who are meditators. You can translate some of these terms now into more practical language based upon experience, rather than just theory or just making an educated guess, I guess. For most of the time, educated guess. Yeah. But it's an ongoing process. And when you start to have some of the experiences of meditation, then you get a better overview of what that word means. What do these words mean? What does tranquility mean as a factor of awakening? Not just sitting down after the meal and dozing off. Tranquility informed by energy, with concentration, clarity of mind. A different translation of tranquility, doesn't it? Than most of us would normally associate with tranquility. Very different experience for somebody who's meditated and recognized what its purpose is in meditation. So the point of having this Pali language is to kind of give us, as it were, a roadmap or signposts pointing in the right direction. And even though we come back to these words again, what does that mean? What does something like tranquility really mean? Passaddhi. What does it really mean? Well, we have this in the Pali language, and then we can translate it in English simply, or we can investigate it. And go back to it again. Okay, is this really passaddhi? Is this really tranquility? We get a clearer and clearer picture of it based upon our direct experience. So somebody else says, "Oh, tranquility is this." You say, "No, it's not. I have my own experience of that." And according to the Pali, give you reference according to the Pali scriptures. Like I hear people say, "Oh, the Buddha said this, the Buddha said that." I say, "Where in the scripture did he say that?" Yeah. Sometimes there's some quite free translations. I remember when Ajahn Chah was coming to Vancouver. Well, I went to Vancouver first to see my family, and then I heard he was coming there. So I was lived with my parents in suburbia in Vancouver, and I was in those days I was a rather strange creature in the suburbs of Vancouver. I think I was the only Buddhist monk in Canada those days. No Thai monks, no Sri Lankan monks. Might have been a few Tibetans, maybe, but so I was, I thought I was lonely basically. So I phoned up a bookshop, a New Age bookshop, and I said, "Do you happen to have any notices on the board for a meditation group?" He said, "Oh yes, we have this one here." And he gave me the phone number, so I phoned this guy up, and I phoned this guy up, and he said, "Oh," I said, "Well, I hear you have a meditation group." He said, "Oh yes, yes." I said, "What kind of meditation do you do?" He said, "Do you know somebody called Ajahn Chah?" I said, "As a matter of fact, I do." And he's coming to Vancouver next week. So this man, he I don't know if he had a bookshop or not, but anyway, he had some business anyway. And he printed out these bookmarks, with Ajahn Chah's quote, one of Ajahn Chah's quotes on it. Be mindful, be free, be happy, or something. I can't remember ever hearing Ajahn Chah say that ever in my life. It's more like, buckle down, meditate longer. Don't eat so much. But I didn't say anything to this man because he was trying to be friendly. So in those days it was Buddhism light. So and when Ajahn Chah came to Vancouver, he was also pretty light too. He was trying to be charming rather than the old forest monk in the forest, the old tough forest monk. He was trying to be friendly and and charming to people. So my mother came to see him at one of our meal offerings, and he this was a great, privilege for Thai people. So she was sitting there on a chair, and then he reached into his bowl and took out some food out of his own bowl and gave it to her. And she was, after he put it in his own bowl, you see. So she was a bit, has he already got his tongue on it or something, but to a Thai person, it would have been, "Oh, food from the Holy Master," very excited. Anyway, I think she ate it anyway, And so when I went back I met her back at their house again. I asked her, "How was it?" She said, "It was pretty crunchy, actually." It wasn't very tasty, It wasn't supposed to be tasty. It's supposed to be sacred food, but different set of values. No. So anyway, when we're trying to study the Buddhist teachings, I mean, it's helpful to have this as a point of reference. What do these? The Buddha was enlightened, we assume. Most we have faith in that. We have trust in that. So he points out these particular aspects. I mean, who would think that an enlightened person would tell you to look at your greed, aversion, delusion, right? Huh? Would you believe that? If I was supposed to say, an enlightened person say, look at your love and your light. Look at the love in the world. Rather than say, look at your greed, aversion, delusion. That sounds, look at your suffering. But when I read that, I thought, oh, this guy's not playing around. He's not he's not just trying to be charming. He's talking about life. And if you look at it, that's what trips you up, isn't it? That's what really trips you up: greed, aversion, delusion. Yeah. The love and the light you can forget about, because that's just a byproduct of the path. But what really is tripping you up is greed, aversion, delusion. And if you can look at that and figure out what that is and work through that, then you're on your way. But it's not something people would normally cheer about, would they? I came to here to talk about the truth, the almighty truth, and ultimate reality. And the Buddha says greed, aversion, delusion. But when I heard that, I thought, oh, this man is not messing around. I mean, he's not trying to impress anybody. He's just stating the facts. And when you look at it, that's what was really tripping up me in my life: greed, aversion, delusion. And I was avoiding it. Didn't want to look at it. Didn't want to notice it. But he pointed it out. If this is an enlightened master pointing it out to you, you take notice of it. If you're serious. So when we hear that, we have trust in the Buddha's teachings, and make use of it. And this is the way to enlightenment, the way to practice. And if you develop it, you have enough trust and enough energy to put into practice, you begin to see, it does work. When you can really be clear about the greed, it doesn't trip you up so much. It doesn't surprise you. It doesn't confuse you. Aversion, oh yeah, right. There it is again. Yeah. But I don't get trapped by it. I don't get confused by it. I don't get run around by it. And just like recognizing Mara. Oh yes, there you are. I see you. Yeah. And you make it conscious. You don't have to worry about it. When it's still unconscious, then watch out. It'll sneak up on you. So having these particular references and reminders, I mean, it's very helpful to have some advice like that, wise advice. If we're left to our own devices, probably we just go into a trance, right? Called enlightenment. But when we get the straight scoop, the Buddha tells us the way it really is, then okay, maybe it's hard to swallow, but if you have enough trust in it, and follow the way, and you find out for yourself. That's the way to the end of suffering, is through it, through to the end of it. So when we make these teachings more conscious, and when we're clear about them, and we investigate them, then we know what they really are. We've already translated it into our direct experience then. That's what the real purpose is. The words give us a signpost, but it's a practice that gives us direct experience. So that's what really counts. So continue with your practice.